Good afternoon, good morning to the folks joining in from the US and that area. Good evening to the folks in Europe and UK. And I think it's probably a good evening to the folks joining in from the Middle East and Asia. Morrisons, which is a very large supermarket, fifth largest, could have stopped the data breach. Very excited to bring in an expert on this particular topic, and we'll tell you how. For all caveats, nothing is 100% secure, so please, we are not implying rather that anything 100% could have stopped a breach or this particular breach, but we have an interesting take on this. And Barnaby, my panelist, we have been discussing a couple of things, and this is why the result of what we were discussing is this particular webinar. And thank you everyone for joining. A couple of hygiene issues very quickly. Save yourself if there is a fire or flood or any other alarm. You can always come back and listen in. Otherwise, if you mute your mobiles, if you have questions, you should see the ability to engage with Barnaby and myself and ask questions or make a statement. If you do give your name, more than happy to give you a shout out. Towards the end, we obviously would love your feedback. So diving straight in. Morrisons is one of the fifth largest in the UK, and it's a very interesting story. But before I do that, I'll just do a brief introduction. I'm the guy on the left with that blue turban, and Mr. Davies, who is the one in the middle. Over to you, Barnaby. Give a brief introduction of who you are and what you're doing.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good afternoon to those of you in Western Europe. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you all this afternoon. We hopefully will benefit from some specific input from the CTO of IntelliSecure, Wittkop, who is a subject matter expert on the topic of DLP. We had a bit of logistical difficulty with Jeremy, but we'll see if we can manage to get him on between now and his slot. I work for an Israeli technology startup called DocAuthority, and we have some unique capabilities in the unstructured data arena. I suspect most people attending the webinar this afternoon, you will have some familiarity with compliance, some familiarity with data security, information management, and so on and so forth. What we're going to try and do is, in a somewhat novel, hopefully, and interesting and engaging way, talk about a specific breach and hopefully bring some new information and interesting information to how maybe that could have gone a bit differently, and we hope that's of interest to you all.
Excellent, Barnaby. Thank you so much. Like Barnaby indicated, Jeremy Wittkop, I think we've got some calendar out of sync, but hopefully we can get him on the line. But otherwise, Barnaby and I are going to be dancing and actually sharing quite some interesting stuff with you. Like we said, please do make this interactive. It's the audience that makes it even more interactive. And feel free to join in. A couple of alternative titles. One of the things that I see, Barnaby, a lot, and we offer a lot of trusted advisory to clients, and what we see is often complexity is the first choice. Sadly, I hope you agree, but often organizations, folks who are working for that organization take a very complex approach to solving a particular problem. And as you and I were discussing, when we put this webinar together, is actually simple things can make a significant amount of difference and actually make it harder, not just for the attacker, but actually make it easier for the organization to understand its risk, its exposure, and where its, as we're going to say, the crown jewels lie. What are your thoughts on this particular issue here?
Amar, is that over to me?
Yes, yes,
sorry, I do apologise. So emphatically so. So one of the points that DocAuthority will make is that if you don't know what you've got and where it is, and you have access to it, you're deeply limited. You're deeply constrained in your ability to develop a meaningful DLP solution or a meaningful DLP stance, even if that's not technology focused. Obviously, data leakage prevention, data leakage reduction, education, all play their part. A stat that has been bandied around before that I've heard is that 80% of data leakage events are actually accidental. It's a training issue far more than it is actually a malicious activity. But again, if you don't know what you've got, where it is, and who's got access to it, fundamentally, you're not going to succeed with an objective to try and manage data leakage in your organisation. It's not possible.
Excellent. Just give a bit of a background. Someone asked, and we were just about to do that. The background of Morrisons, the supermarket, let's refer to it as the supermarket data breach. An insider, privileged insider, was disciplined for some stuff that he was not supposed to do, and he was not very happy, and he leaked a significant amount of data of human resource, the employees of past and previous and current employees out on the internet, and he got punished, but the 5,000 employees took the supermarket to court in the UK to say that the supermarket is vicariously liable for not preventing that data breach. So it's a very important case. If you haven't heard about it, folks, please do go and do your research. The supermarket has appealed multiple times now, and they have lost that appeal. The supermarket's argument is the employee has been rightly punished, but as the Americans call it, the class action lawsuit, Morrisons has lost. So they have now taken that appeal to the final court, and the results are going to be probably in the next few months in this year. So moving forward, Barnaby, this is what we were going to do. And what are the regulatory trends, by the way? Over to you, sir.
Okay, so before we get into the what I think are the more interesting topics that we wish to talk about this afternoon, one of the things that I want to talk about is emerging regulatory trends. Okay, not typically an exciting topic, but we will endeavour to make it so. So, in front of you, you can see the trends for regulatory penalties in a variety of different domains over the last, in fact, it's two periods. So I actually get the slide up myself so I can look at it. And the grey bars are the frequency of fines in the period 2013 to 2017, okay? And the red bars, or the orange bars, are the frequency of those fines in the first half of 2018. And you can see there some changes in those fines: corporate governance, regulatory obligations, conduct of business obligations, etc., etc., okay? And there's not that much to take away from that graph as it stands, okay? Other than perhaps to say that, well, whatever, privacy and cyber security, it's not actually looking too significant. It's not looking like something I should worry about too much at the moment. Looks like financial crime, conduct of business obligations, looks like they're having all the fun. So this is the frequency of the fines, and this is globally, okay? And then just moving this on a little bit, we can actually look at the amounts of those fines, okay, and we can see some enormous ones in the conduct of business obligations. And by the way, that's liable, just for any of you that are interested. And in privacy and cyber security, there, the fines are so small that they don't even show up on the same graph. I could have done something, taken a bit of license with the graph, but I didn't. They're just so small that when I put the graph together, they didn't even turn up. Okay, so far so good. Okay. But if we cut this graph a slightly different way, okay, and we actually look at the rate of change of both the amounts of those fines and the frequency of those fines, we see something I think is truly spectacular, okay? So on the one hand, we're seeing, let me just get the slide up. I'm sorry, I'm juggling two different slide decks at the moment. On the one hand, we are seeing the frequency of those fines increase by 230%, okay? And on the other side, we're seeing the amount of those fines increase by 1,580%. And those are truly, there's only one word that we can use in that context, and that's wow. That is a mind-blowing set of figures, okay, for the rate of change relating to cyber and privacy-related regulatory failings, okay? And this is global, okay, then how do we know all this? Where does this data come from? Because most of the people we talk to when we surface this sort of data, they're actually very interested, and the first thing they say is, well, where did you get this data from? Because this is invaluable, okay? And we're always happy to share, okay? So there's a company domiciled, it's domiciled principally in the US and the UK. It's called Duff & Phelps, and they produce 2 reports every year. Those are the reports: the Global Enforcement Review, the Global Regulatory Outlook. And here's the best bit. They're free. Go to their website, download them. They're about 100 pages each, okay? And they will tell you who is getting fined, for what, in what global region, and by which regulatory body, okay? So you might find that in one part of the world you're more likely to get fined for conduct of business obligations, and in another part of the world you're more likely to get fined for regulatory obligations. But taken en masse and globally, okay, these are the figures that I think are the most interesting, okay? Very, very high rates of change. And what do we anticipate that moving to in 2019? Do we suddenly think those figures are going to revert to mean? Do we think they're going to suddenly turn out to go back to normal? No, not for 1 minute. That is triple-digit changes, 4-digit changes in 2018, and I would anticipate seeing the same sorts of changes in 2019. And you know, we've only got to look at the Google fine in the last 10 days of 50 million to actually realise that privacy and cyber suddenly got real teeth. And I just did some quick maths. I didn't look into it in great detail, but that fine that Google got of 50 million, huge fine, no doubt about it, really made the headlines, and really, you know, we can establish finally that the regulators found their teeth. Now, I don't know if there are any GDPR experts out there, but there are obviously 2 tiers of fines. One is 2% or 10 million, 2% of global revenue or 10 million, whichever is the greater. The higher tier fines are 4% of global turnover or 20 million. I'm not sure which tier the Google regulatory breach fell into, but I do know this: if it was the 4% fine, then that fine of 50 million was 5% of the maximum fine they could have been awarded. Okay, just to put things into perspective. So it looks like a massive fine, smells like a massive fine. Actually, in the grand scheme of things, the regulator barely broke into a sweat on that one. Okay. So you now know some interesting figures. You now know where we got those figures from, and you can generate those figures for yourself.
Sorry, Barnaby, just to stress. Thank you for that. This is very important, folks. These are free reports, and thanks for sharing that, Barnaby. So use this not just to your advantage, but obviously for the knowledge, because the regulatory, as you know, if you go back to that one other slide at the back, the rate of change is, I think the best way to that we designed that slide is literally wow. And it's a shame, but I think it's, you know, the Google thing about the 50 million, you're right, it's just a small, tiny percentage, but the scene in the future and now in the future, you know, everyone does need to be aware of this data, and these 2 reports are free. Go and download them every year. Carry on, Barnaby. Thank you.
And arguably, if you actually don't know where you're, I mean, we like to think with DocAuthority, and we'll look at this in a bit more detail in a bit, we tell you what you've got, where it is, and who's got access to it. These Duff & Phelps reports, which I think are invaluable, and they're under public, you know, they're not widely known about as far as I know. These tell you what you're most likely to get a kick in the shins from the regulator for. So it's starting to inform your security investment decisions. What should I spend money on? Well, my most sensitive data. Where is it? Well, maybe we know that, maybe we don't. What am I most likely to get fined for? Well, Duff & Phelps' reports can tell you that. Okay. So, having prepared the way a little bit, and hopefully having given you some new information, which you might not have before, and having perhaps presented to you why cyber and privacy does have a very strong case being made for it currently, let's get into talking about this rather strange breach that unfortunately hit a British supermarket. And this gentleman, Andrew Skelton, I don't want to demonise this gentleman. He probably had quite a bad day. This is a bit of a human tragedy when these things happen, and I am not painting him into the role, too conspicuously into the role of the villain. But needless to say, unfortunately, it was him who committed the deed on the day and was found guilty in court. So let's just have a little talk about this. Andrew Skelton was a senior auditor for a British supermarket, and he had been reprimanded. Okay, now the reports as I have read like this: he had been reprimanded by his employer for using the post room to send and receive packages on eBay, and those packages contained what we in the UK called legal highs. Okay, so drugs which are certainly in a very, very grey area and not entirely in line with, I'm sure, Morrisons' published company culture. So he had been reprimanded for this, and potentially, perhaps that should have gone a bit further, and Morrisons probably rue the day that they perhaps didn't take it any further, because this had far-reaching ramifications for them. So what happened next? He unfortunately took that reprimand rather personally, and he published the personal data, salaries, and a whole bunch of other stuff, just not quite sensitive health-related data, but not far off it, and he published it to newspapers, websites, and then tried to cover up his tracks by sort of implicating colleagues and all the rest of it. And this was 100,000 of the supermarket's employees, so a significant breach. Obviously, massive reputational hit to Morrisons, massive clean-up, cost them £2 million just to clean this up so far. Okay, Andrew Skelton was sentenced to 8 years in court, and I believe £170,000 of fine that was then redistributed to Morrisons by way of compensation, or in some shape or form. They probably weren't feeling too well compensated by that point. And then, astonishingly, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse for Morrisons, 5,000 of those staff, okay, decided to have their day in court. They claimed that they had been potentially exposed to harm, and so on and so forth. And you would think that Morrisons would have been taken to task under the umbrella of data protection or computer misuse or something like that. Well, in fact, no. The courts, astonishingly, and I am astonished, and there are probably all sorts of legal nuances as to why this happened, the courts found that Morrisons were not answerable under any failing of data protection, which I am surprised at, I have to say, but found Andrew Skelton found Morrisons vicariously liable for the actions of their employee. Okay, so far we're not looking at a data protection breach here. We're not really even looking at a security breach, although I think it clearly was. What we're talking about is Morrisons were found to be responsible for the actions of their employee. Now, to put this in perspective, and Morrisons really did have a bad year here, it wasn't the only time Morrisons were found to be vicariously responsible or liable, I should say, for the actions of one of their employees. One of their tanker drivers, that's a petrol tanker on a petrol forecourt, actually attacked a member of the public. Okay, just one of those things that happens from time to time. And they were also found vicariously liable for that action. So quite how these things were lumped into the same bracket, I do not know. But nevertheless, that's what happened. Okay. Now, just reiterating what Amar said at the start of the show, Morrisons were horrified by this, quite rightly so. It is a very clear case of where the victim has, in my mind at least, has been labelled the perpetrator, which is a bit of an emerging trend for data breaches, security breaches of this sort. They lost their case in the court, they lost their case in appeal, and they are now on their way to the Supreme Court, where I would imagine there is at least a 50% chance of them losing this, and at which point it opens the floodgates for 5,000, this group of people with a sort of well-funded lawyers to go after Morrisons for what undoubtedly will be a very, very large sum of money. Okay, so all very good. Go on, Amar. Go on, please.
No, I was going to say, Barnaby, I mean, one of the things that we want to take out of this particular webinar is from the discussions, the whole point of this webinar was what you and me started discussing last year, is I know that, and people say, yeah, they should have done everything. Yeah, I don't think we are here going to say it's not, a breach is going to happen. So we're not saying they could have 100% stopped the breach. What we want to discuss out of this is actually, the angle and the approach that DocAuthority takes, which I really like, is the angle that you guys are taking on understanding what is truly valuable. So I think we're going to get, just for the viewers, we're going to get to that part in the next few minutes. So hold on.
Undoubtedly, and you're right to bring me back onto topic, Amar. One very last point before we leave this discussion about the sort of litigation consequences that Morrisons might be facing. Anyone who's got a few idle minutes should take a moment to look into what's called portfolio litigation. Okay, so portfolio litigation is where litigation cases such as this one are being used as an investment vehicle. I kid you not. Okay, so people are actually putting money into funds, making it available for people to pursue these sorts of litigation companies, sort of David and Goliath type things. Okay, It's increasingly popular, it's increasingly common, and it's estimated there's 70 billion currently sitting in portfolio investment funds. Okay, so just in case you were thinking, don't worry, we'll probably get away with it, there might be a portfolio investment fund just around the corner who is waiting to fund a very well-funded, very well-orchestrated litigation action.
Sorry, I do apologize. Specifically for litigation, is that what you're saying, buddy?
Yes. So portfolio litigation is essentially where investors, there's a fund manager, okay, who looks after a fund and people invest in it, and the market loves it because it's completely disconnected from stock markets, and so we invest in that. And then let's just say, for instance, pharmaceutical company A, okay, has its medicine go wrong, or let's say we have a big data breach, which is rather topical, isn't it? And let's say that portfolio fund manager decides, I smell blood in the water, I might actually advertise in the paper and see if I can recruit, and then he's got 100 million in his back pocket to go to that organisation and say, how about it? And I think data breaches will increasingly catch the interest of portfolio litigation fund managers. So you don't just have to worry about the regulator, and you don't just have to worry about the victim anymore. You have to worry about these very, very eagle-eyed portfolio fund managers. Okay.
Wow, portfolio litigation fund.
Portfolio litigation, there's a really good article in the FT about it, in the Financial Times, so about it a while back. So I can distribute a link after the session.
Yeah, if you share that with me, and then we'll ping it over to all the audience. Yeah. That's a very, very worthwhile thing to know. Wow.
Isn't it? Timely, isn't it? So we set the scene a bit here, because I'm assuming that the attendees to the webinar, they know a bit about DLP, they probably know a bit about data security, but I'm just trying to pitch and set this up and to allow you guys to be able to make the case in your own organisations as to why this matters more in 2018 than it did in 2017, and why it's going to matter more in 2019 than it did in 2018. And that's what I'm trying to equip you with, some really good sound bites and some tidbits of information that might help you make the case for investment in your own organisations. Good. Right. Now, this is the point where Jeremy Wittkop, our resident DLP expert and extremely entertaining public speaker, was going to come in and give us lots of useful information on top of DLP. Now, Amar, how do we want to handle this? We can quickly talk over the headlines, or we can keep that section.
Let's just carry on. I mean, it's a good question, and this is, I think, if I may, I'll just kind of lead, and then you can add to it.
Yeah, sure thing.
I think, when we do a lot of trust and advisory with clients of different sizes, one of the biggest questions is, and this slide is actually a very good one, is actually what is a critical data asset? And just for the clarity of everyone, for the avoidance of all doubt, we are not just focusing on GDPR. Obviously, GDPR is right at the forefront of many, many people. It used to be, and maybe now it's not much, but it's actually the question that the business has to ask is what is a critical data asset? And then we're going to come to what you're going to also talk about, structured and unstructured. And I think this goes very well along with that particular exercise. Is one of the biggest challenges we see. You know, people are spending a lot of tangible money. Money is tangible into tangible products such as, I'm going to say this, but firewalls, etc., etc. But they're not really sure what they're protecting. Many times they're protecting a lot of databases, maybe, as you're going to come to it later, Barnaby, structured data. But actually, I'm not going to take the thunder away from you. You have some interesting statistic about how much unstructured data is within organizations. And no one is sitting down from a business angle. This is not a technical discussion. We kind of implore our customers to say, listen, before you spend a penny, before you do anything else, do you know what critical data what is critical for you? What is your crown jewel? If you don't know where they are, if you don't have technology such as yours that you've given me a demo, which is why I've invited you in. I really liked what I saw, and unless you do something at that basic level, you're protecting something that may not actually be, it's not even, you don't even know what you're protecting. You're buying a firewall, you built a gate around your house, but your jewels are in somebody else's apartment. I don't know, bad analogy, but I'm just thinking out loud, right?
Sure.
And then we've got the next one here that Jeremy had put forward. I'll kind of over to you to see, it's taking the right action. Over to you, sir.
And it's interesting to note the point you were making. I try and say the letters GDPR as rarely as possible. But it's interesting in that when we talk about Morrisons, it was never about GDPR, okay? And the difficulties, the expense of cleaning up are not always regulatory in nature. In terms of DLP, when we can talk about GDPR, okay, which is, I think, does slightly interesting. Any of you guys out there who are GDPR focused, Articles 30 to 34, okay, those are the articles that relate to technical controls or technology controls. Could you have implemented something that might have helped to prevent this data breach? So I would strongly recommend for those of you who are in the EU or doing business with the EU who overlap with GDPR, have a look at those articles. Always get the necessary legal consultation. So I don't care how clever you are, it is not for a non-legal practitioner to interpret the GDPR articles. I've tried and been humbled by legal experts, so I don't do it anymore. But in terms of DLP phases, okay, if you don't know what you have and you don't know where it is, okay, you're very unlikely to succeed, okay? And I don't know if any of you guys on the webinar now have got existing DLP implementations, okay, but we speak to guys that do. And it is rarely the case, in fact, I'm not sure I can ever remember a single case where anyone will boast or claim that their DLP implementation is 100% effective. Okay, it is incredibly difficult in my experience, and I think Jeremy would reiterate the same thing, to have a tool or a platform on your perimeter. Okay, so either we'll talk about email, we'll talk about USB pen drives, we'll talk about web uploads of data. There probably isn't a technology now, and I'm not sure there ever will be, okay, that can consistently and universally detect that data and filter it out and say that should not leave this organization, or in fact it should, or there's a certain volume can, but beyond that it's too much risk, okay. That's the holy grail. I don't think that technology is available now. Amar, it might be something that you're actually you've got a bit more exposure to than I do, and I don't think it's something going to materialize in the next 18 months.
No, totally. And I think, Jeremy, this slide is probably a better one. It's getting much, there is no technology that's going to ever do everything, right? And the reality is, from a business angle, anyone who is in any business related to digital content, which is pretty much a lot of businesses, it's getting tougher and more expensive. And this is where businesses are making compromises because they're not able to get a grip I think this is really key, Barnaby. They want to do the right thing. All the clients that we speak to, no one wants to do the wrong thing. I don't think even the supermarket chain that we're discussing actually wanted to do it. They definitely wanted to protect the data. I think the reality is that there is so much complexity, so much data, so much technology, and if I may, many a times, conflicting information that decisions, the traditional kind of business life cycle to do something it's not catching up with the way technology and the rest of technology is moving. So it becomes very difficult for the business to go, how do I protect my data?
It's also even harder, and I know this because about 18 months I was in the unenviable position of doing it. It's actually very difficult to write an investment case for a DLP implementation. How much will I save? How much risk will be reduced? Will it actually stop a breach? What do I actually get for my my £150,000 investment, and possibly as much as a £1.5 million investment for a large organisation. Okay, so yes, DLP is never getting any easier. It's a complicated topic, and even if you, with the best DLP in the world, that idea that there is a magic solution on the perimeter that can immediately identify a suspect's file and stop it, or allow whilst at the same time not catching a lot of false positives, okay, which is perhaps as big a risk as actually the other thing. It's not suddenly going to materialise. I think it's the Holy Grail. I think people have been working on it for 10 years or more now, and it's not come yet. And I don't suppose it's going to come in the next 18 months. Okay.
No, totally. And one of the takeaways, I know there are many different topics, and sadly we only have 1 hour. One of the takeaways from now, and we're going to build on top of that with with Barnaby, is focus on the unstructured data. It's not easy to get your head around the unstructured data, and this is where, when I invited Barnaby from DocAuthority, is that ability to get your head around your unstructured risk. I think, Barnaby, maybe if we call it exposed risk or unstructured risk, maybe it may have a bit more of impetus for people to go, ooh, okay, what does unstructured risk mean?
Absolutely. Well, another way we can look at it is look at it from the structured perspective first, and then whatever's left leaves you with unstructured. So there's been about 20% of an organisation's data is typically structured. There are some very significant exceptions to that. So Netflix and your Googles, your Facebooks, almost very little of their data will be anything other than structured because of the nature of their business. And structured data is relatively simple. Do not confuse that statement for saying that it's easy. It isn't. But you know what it is, you know what's in there, you can get at it programmatically. Access control is usually a bit simpler, pen testing is usually a bit simpler, so on and so forth. You don't have to go into that structured data and actually assess the sensitivity of each and every line item, because you assess the sensitivity of the structured data asset itself, and everything in it inherits the same sensitivity or classification, okay, the same risk profile, if you like. If you take your unstructured data, so we could talk about emails, we could talk about email attachments, we could talk about files sitting around on network file shares, we could talk about files in SharePoint, OneDrive, Box, you name it. All of that unstructured stuff, 80% of your data, it has, in my experience, it's been neglected for a period of a decade or two or even 3. And that's a risk, and it's a very expensive, hard to tackle risk, and this is actually the principal thrust of where we sort of move the conversation on to next, okay? Because I think most people have got a better handle on their structured data. We don't work in that space. We work in the unstructured space, and we've got some good ideas about how you can deal with that.
Yes, Barnaby, I think this is Jeremy's slide on critical data protection. I'm not sure why he had Elon Musk here, so I think it's only Barnaby you can, only Jeremy who can tell us, Barnaby.
But maybe he was maybe Jeremy had wangled him on as a guest speaker, Amar. I don't know, but we'll have to leave our audience with that mystery as to why.
Yeah.
Tune in next time. We'll hopefully have Jeremy on and he can explain himself. So.
But over to you, sir, on this one. I mean, if you have any input on this, yeah.
So, in fact, not so much actually, and in fact, I think our audience out there are either going to, they'll have an insight into data leakage prevention, and I'm probably not going to add anything to their day. So, but sorry, Amar, you pushed it on to the next slide. I was a bit slow catching up there. So let's just talk about some of the attributes of structured versus unstructured data and why and what that means, what the implications are. Okay, so let's have why would we focus all our energy on structured data? Well, one, we can. Okay, how do we manage all the unstructured data? We can't, we won't, it's too expensive, it's too hard. We put it on the too hard pile. But I'll tell you what, we could do the structured data. I've sat in rooms with that very argument, no kidding. Structured data usually sits on a platform, someone owns it, there's a service owner, there is a business area, there's a budget holder. It is someone can't say, I'm not accountable for that. Unstructured data is in a different place, okay? Audit's always going to go after your main business processes, your main repositories of business data, your operationally significant stuff. That's very often going to fit in structured data platforms. And audit, the KPMGs, the Deloittes and all the rest of it, they probably suffer the same problem. Unstructured data is just too hard, okay? And lastly, you also get security and architecture oversight of structured data repositories. New database, exposed to the internet, yeah, of course we're going to pen test it and design it within an inch of its life. Someone creating a spreadsheet, capturing the personal data of all our 3,000 global members, no, that doesn't benefit from security or architecture oversight as a habit. So we're looking at the other angle, unstructured data. It's not simple, it's not easy, it really isn't, okay? It is very rarely is someone accountable for that. Now, oddly enough, we are working with just one customer, big global customer, and there's a guy we're working with there, and he's the only one of his type I've ever met. He's the global head of static data security, and isn't that wonderful? Just one guy who, of all the people we've ever met and worked with, who actually it is his job to look after, unstructured data sitting on file shares and SharePoint, but we've only ever met one, okay? It's a less easy target for audit, because it's too much work for them to sift through unstructured data, and it's certainly got less oversight. So straight away, in the structured versus unstructured space, structured tends to attract more scrutiny, more review, more oversight, and it tends to attract, frankly, it's better managed. Unstructured, I would go as far as to say, is routinely neglected, okay? Where to next? Okay, so, oops, this one there, pardon me. So what does this actually mean, okay? If we look at unstructured data, what I can tell you from what I see on an almost daily basis, you cannot secure files by their physical location. Okay, people do. That's how typical ACLs and enterprise work. Okay, and anyone that is administering entity permission sets on Windows file shares or NAS boxes or SharePoint, so on and so forth, files are secured by their location. That brings with it two assumptions, okay, that files are co-located based on either their type or their classification. This is nonsense, okay? We have some very profound insights into actually how data is stored, where it is put, and so on and so forth, and those assumptions that typical ACLs rely upon simply are not valid, okay? They're very difficult to put right. So one of our customers, I think, let me just get my figures right, they have 35,000 P11Ds. That will only mean something to you guys who are UK-based. The P11D is a tax sort of form used by Inland Revenue to track people's salary, their benefits, their in-kind, what sort of allowance they got for their company car and that sort of thing. So it's sensitive stuff. It's got their name, their address, national insurance number, that sort of thing. Okay. We found 35,000 of those on the customer's network in 133 separate locations, a good portion of which are accessible by any authenticated user in the estate. So any hope that you have that documents are co-located is very unreliable, okay, and any idea that ACLs are effective based on the fact that documents, for instance, HR are stored in the HR directory, that's equally frail, okay. So just moving on, just slightly aware of time, this in fact, then is your unstructured data. Okay, it really is a good metaphor. It's a bucket of rusty nuts and bolts, some of which are the same, some of which are unique, all jumbled together. Okay, it's like that. It is something of a liability. It is not very much use to anyone. Okay, and potentially the best thing you can do with it is dispose of it in an environmentally friendly fashion. Most of the competition, okay, most of the vendors out there, when they're trying to fix problems with unstructured data, they go about it by using regular expressions, or they crawl it, index it, catalog it in some way, and what you're going to get is this: the violations and exceptions. Not just a few, tens of thousands, okay, spreadsheets full of files that contain a national insurance number, a passport number, a driving license number, a birthday, a postcode, a telephone number. The list goes on, and most of the tools out there are in some shape or form, they're violation or exception based. Okay, I could name a few, but I tend to be try and be as charitable as possible to the other vendors in the space, in the hope that they will reciprocate. I'll probably be disappointed in that. So DocAuthority, okay, do something very, very different, okay, and what we do with unstructured data is that, okay. We take files that are approximately the same: invoices, purchase orders, receipts, expense claims, anything really, and we put them in logical groups, and we call those groups file groups, okay. We don't do it on the content, we don't do it on the metadata either, okay, so it wouldn't work, okay. We have a very, very unorthodox machine learning algorithm that groups files. Well, now is not the time. Now is not the time for me to go into details, but put simply, it is language agnostic, so it doesn't matter if it's in Attic, Greek, Pinyin, or double byte, or just plain English. It will put those documents together. This is usually the time which half the audience calls us the Messiah, and the other half calls us a liar. Okay, but we are doing. I kid you not, it has happened. We have been kicked out of major international banks because they won't believe us. Funnily enough, the bank down the road throws open the door and says, "We'll give you a go," and by the end of the day, we're doing this for them. We can stand our sort of...
Barnaby, sorry to interrupt you.
No, please.
But this is a very critical image. You know, they say image is worth 1,000 words and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This and the one before, to me, well, the one before is the problem, in a way.
Yeah.
And what everyone wants to do, correctly in my opinion, is do what this image is looking at is, yes, I've got structured data, which hopefully I can manage more easily. But it's the structured data. Is everything that's in my, cabin that's thrown around, how do I put it very quickly, classified, and as I think you're going to touch on, what's the value of that data?
So you, of course, afford a lot of benefits when you do this, okay? So, for instance, when we create these file groups, okay, which is logical, we haven't touched the data at the moment, we're completely non-invasive, but we know what you've got, we know where it is, we know who's got access to it, we know how old it is. And all of a sudden, if we open up one file in a file group, well, we might as well have opened up the other 850,000, okay, because they'll all contain the same type of document. We don't care where they are, okay. Now, let's bring this back to where we started, which was a discussion about regulatory outlook. It was the discussion about Morrisons having a really hard time with it, okay. It was, and oddly enough, it was a discussion that Morrisons weren't being hauled over the rakes for a data protection or a compliance issue. It was something completely different, okay. But it all tracks back to knowing what you've got, where it is, who's got access to it, and managing it appropriately. Structured data, we know, is relatively more straightforward. It's never simple, it's never cheap, that's not what I'm saying, but it is more straightforward. But what we enable you to do is to treat your unstructured data in a similar way to the way you treat structured data. So if we look at our nuts and our bolts, or for instance, our performance reviews, which is always a good one, we don't care where those documents are. We can just treat them as one coherent whole now. We can consolidate them down to a single location, okay, nice and quickly and easily. We can effect retention really, really easily. Another thing we can do, because bearing in mind that data leakage 80% of data leakage, now it's a shame Jeremy isn't here because he'll have his finger more on the pulse with these statistics than I do, but the figure that I've heard bandied around before is that 80% of data leakage is accidental. It's a training issue, or it's sloppy handling of where you send the email, or so on and so forth. But we could easily, and it literally is a few mouse clicks, we could write metadata into all the files in a file group, all those performance reviews that might be in 2 different countries and 150 separate locations and so on and so forth. And we can say, just put a flag in that file's properties, please, saying internal, confidential, HR, whatever you want to do. And we could tell the DLP solution, if you see these flags in the file, don't let it out of the building. Okay? And straight away, that won't stop it malice, okay, because someone could come along, change those properties, or save it as a different file, or print it as a PDF. Many ways to get around it if you're really, really keen. But it will 80% reduction in risk right there, okay, for a very, very little effort, okay. So we'll just have a little review, okay.
Barnaby, sorry to interrupt again.
No, please do.
The key word is effort. This can be done without any tool or with existing archaic tools. It's effort and time. And this is what I see with a lot of clients and people. They want to do something, but they don't want to necessarily automate. And, you know, I've seen a product that actually tried it. And there may be others. Remember, we're not just selling. We're not selling. We're just, I invited Barnaby because I liked what I saw. The speed of that thing, the tool, to be able to do what would take a very, very long time.
Well, we could take that a step further. I mean, you're right in terms of it would take a long time, but we're not actually even sure it's possible. Okay, the idea that you could go through your files one at a time and group them like this without technology, ours or someone else's. Now, as it goes, we're not aware of, there's a few guys who are making the same sorts of noises, and we actually think we're waiting to see those competitors that are doing things the same way. Because just like our bucket of bolts, unless we do something with the data like this to categorize it, everything else is a hiding to nowhere, and a very, very expensive one. Okay. And in terms of data leakage prevention, safeguarding confidential information going forwards, which we now know is a more important subject for 2019, and it's going to continue to grow in importance, if you don't categorize your data in this way, if you do not know what you have, where it is, and who's got access to it, I do not know how you can formulate an investment strategy. I do not know how you can prioritize where to put two-factor authentication, or where to consolidate your controls, because you don't know where the risk is. So we're expecting to see more vendors in this space producing this sort of capability. Okay, and because we think it's the only way of tackling it. And if anyone else anyone attending the webinar has got a different view, or you've done things differently in your organization, we'd be very, very keen to hear it. But every day we are speaking to customers and potential clients and prospects who have just got 20 years of data from 5 different companies that they've acquired over the same period. And the prospect of trying to do this without automation and without tooling is not viable. It's not practical. I don't know if anyone can visualize what it would actually look like going through 25 terabytes of data. That's a reasonable size, a stack of data for a mid-sized organization. You're talking somewhere between let's go do it the other way, probably talking between 50 and 75 million documents there. Okay, you're not going to do that manually. Okay, so you always have that risk that you always have that risk that you don't know what you've got and where it is. And that consequently it's very difficult.
I do apologize to the chapter. We are running out of time, Barnaby. I know we could actually go on.
No, please do. Please do.
Hold another webinar to literally show you how this cool stuff works. But let's just quickly review for the audience the benefits of doing something like this.
So you can all read. So I won't read what you've got there word for word. Okay, but look at the data that we have from Duff & Phelps. So that's going to help you know what you've got, and you know where the regulatory pressures are. you can inform your investment cases that you're putting forward for funding. Okay, if you know you've got crown jewels, and there's this term crown jewels analysis, which is starting to gain a little bit of traction, okay, if you know that is, then that's where you can prioritize your attention. Again, coming back to that analogy of 25 terabytes of data, you don't even know where to start, okay. With a solution that starts to categorize stuff, you can start to identify what's the stuff that matters the most and to take the appropriate action, okay. You do get a ton of other benefits as a byproduct of doing this, right? You also get to pull out obsolescence, okay? So sort of ROT, redundant, obsolete, or trivial file types, MP3s, WAVs, MPEGs, all that stuff that's kicking around taking up space. You get that as a byproduct. We ingest and catalog all your stuff, so you get enterprise search as well. If you're in the discovery space. No, please, Amar, please do.
I do apologize, and BrightTalk isn't really good. I mean, one of the benefits, I just wanted to let others know, it actually, and I think you touched on it briefly, it allows people who don't want to take ownership of their data. It gives them no excuse. It's a very important thing to stress. Part of the challenge is, we're going to identify data owners and we're going to get them to take responsibility. If you can show the data owners, this is your stack, your bunch, your bucket, and this is all that data in there that's very valuable to us. It's in our experience, ownership becomes much more easier. People they have no choice. So it's very important.
You know what? You actually have hit a key point there, and it was one of the things that's picked up on the previous slides. You know, it's about ownership of unstructured data. It's not typically anyone's job per se. It unfortunately falls down the cracks. It's everyone's job. If it's something that's everyone's job, guess what? It doesn't get done. Okay, exactly. And you're dead right, because when we create those file groups, and remember what those file groups are, they're a group of files that are almost identical, and we've had those file groups of hundreds of thousands in size, where every file in it is absolutely, it's a vehicle requisition order or something like that, and we'll have hundreds of thousands, and then it's very easy to tie that back to an organizational process. And when you've got an organizational process, you've got an operational owner. It's just someone's process. Someone has a team running that process, generating those documents. Well, guess what? You are now front and center to perform retention on this data, to ensure it's managed securely, to ensure that only the people that should have access to it. And that's very difficult if you don't have this sort of insight into your data.
Yeah. So, excellent. Thank you for that. Yes. Sorry, go on.
We can go on. I think there was one more slide with a few comments on it. Okay, is there another? With a few more benefits that we can talk to. I suppose we could tie it back to actually let's keep in mind the breach side of things. Okay, so how ultimately does this help you in a breach scenario? Well, fundamentally, it's going to allow you to decide what's the data that can do us most harm if it's breached in a regulatory setting, okay? What is the data that's going to cost us the most if we lose it to a competitor? There is such a thing that's where it's not a regulatory breach, but you've just lost next year's marketing plan, and that's not going to do you any good at all, okay? So this allows you to prioritize, okay? This is there's 20-year backlog of work here that hasn't been done. Okay, so one of the other benefits of doing this work, categorizing your data, well, we've got our merger and acquisitions document, we've got our new product lineup for 2019, we've got our HR data, our customer list, okay, or our marketing plans for the next 18 months. All of these things are, I guess, sensitive, secret, and need to benefit from our attention. Luncheon vouchers from 1995, not so much. Okay, so crucially, what you're doing is you're separating the critical few from the trivial many. Okay, which is I would say is a fundamental part of any technology project or implementation, or realizing the benefits as quickly as possible. How can we get the most gain in the shortest time for the least spend? And without sifting through your data and be able to categorize it for the stuff that matters and the stuff that doesn't, okay, I don't see how you're going to succeed with that.
Okay. Just a reminder to the audience, you can email us, info@cm-alliance. Barnaby, I will get Barnaby to share the link to the FT article about the fund, the litigation fund, which I think is a very interesting takeaway. You can always get in touch. We will share this PowerPoint a bit later on, and we will possibly, with Barnaby, and if I can twist his arm a little bit, actually show you how this thing actually works. It's quite funky, and I think the key word message to me, Barnaby, and we kind of advise clients also is you've got to use automation. You've got to use the right tool for the right job. Tools are not the solution, but you need to understand what your problem is, and then go and look at what can solve it.
Absolutely.
Over to you, so final comments, and then we'll kind of give it away.
And I think the thing I will offer, I'm always delighted. I'm a great evangelist for the DocAuthority product, okay, and the approach, maybe as much as anything else, the approach as opposed to the technology and the company I work for, so I can't claim to be entirely unbiased. But, and I will make the offer, in an hour is more than enough to do what I would call quite a compelling and light-hearted demonstration of our tool. We can set up a sort of a remote Zoom session, something like that, where we can interact a little bit more. And I'd be more than happy to run a couple of those sessions for the delegates that are on the webinar this afternoon. So if those delegates have got a way to reach out to you and make their wants felt, then we'll stick out a couple of webinars or a couple of remote sessions. They are usually they're crowd pleasers, and people are quite interested in what we can do, and it opens up their eyes as to perhaps one or two strategies they could implement locally.
Excellent. I want to thank all the audience. Barnaby, obviously yourself, thank you very much. But to the audience, thank you. Please do leave us feedback. 1 hour seems a lot, but as you all know, it gets a bit rushed. We have no choice but to apologize. We obviously try with people to kind of bring them back and talk more. Do give us feedback, do let us know, and we will keep in touch with you with all the links that we've discussed. Thank you, Barnaby, and thank you, everybody else. Have a good day.
Thank you, Amar, and thank you to all the participants this afternoon.